Now, talking about Secretary of State, were you surprised that Kennedy appointed you when you really didn't know him that well?
Yes, I was very much surprised. I had never met John F. Kennedy, and in December 1960, after the election, he asked me to come to see him in his little place in Georgetown there, and I went over there and we spent a couple of hours. We were talking about possible names to be Secretary of State. He had 3 or 4 in his mind, and I added 2 or 3 to it. No discussion whatever about my taking the job.
Yes.
And so I went on back to New York and told my colleagues at the Rockefeller Foundation that I'd be staying at the foundation. They could dismiss any press speculation they might have seen involving my name. Well, the very next day, Kennedy called me and said he wanted me to take the job. And I said, now, wait a minute. There are a lot of things we ought to discuss before you make that decision. So I said, all right, come on down to West Palm Beach tomorrow, and we'll talk about it. So I went on down there, and we spent the morning going over all sorts of things. And then he announced it, but it came as a complete surprise.
Mr. Secretary, who did you recommend when he asked you for some names? Who did you throw out?
Well, one man I recommended strongly was Robert Lovett, who had been Under Secretary of State under Marshall and was Secretary of Defense for a period.
Yes.
Extraordinarily able fellow, but he had serious stomach ulcers and things like that, and health kept him from being considered.
Yes.
And there were some others, but I'd rather not name them.
No, feel free not to. What basic qualifications secretaries of state in the past, for example, Marshall was a military man, Ed Muskie was a senator, what qualifications should a president-elect look for when he searches for a secretary of state?
Well, you should find someone who has had some experience with the rest of the world.
Yes.
I had a good deal of that in the Truman administration, but also at the Rockefeller Foundation, we had relations with about 60 countries in the course of a given year. And so that I think is important.
Yes.
I think a deep understanding of our Constitution is important. The United States has the most complicated constitutional political system of any country in the world. The late Chief Justice Earl Warren visited our law school here shortly before his death, and on that occasion reminded us that if the 3 branches of the federal government were each to pursue their own constitutional powers to the end of the trail, our system simply could not function.
Yes.
It would freeze up like an engine without oil, impasse being the underlying threat in our constitutional system. So it takes an enormous amount of time on the part of those who hold responsibility within that system just to make it work.
Yes.
And so at least half of the time of the Secretary of State is taken up with the domestic arrangements that are required to have a policy before he starts talking to the foreigner. And a Secretary of State must understand that.
Yes.
I think another thing is the willingness of a president to give his confidence to his Secretary of State.